Good evening, Mr. Speaker. First of all, let me wish everybody a prosperous New Year, and may good health continue to prevail upon your families and your friends and your constituents. May I also take the time to recognize the constituents of Micoud South and thank them for their continued support, and that we continue to prosper together in making Micoud South one of the finest constituencies in St. Lucia. Speaker, in some ways it's a good thing what we're here doing, but some ways it's discouraging. And I'm sure for many of the St. Lucian citizens who are looking at us tonight and looking at the amount of energy and in some cases passion that was put into the debate this evening on a very important issue. But let us not fool ourselves for a moment in thinking that the citizens of this country right now are preoccupied with history. They've heard it. There's nothing new that's come out here. Maybe some of the persons who have not said things but are now, depending on what side they're sitting on, now have something different to say than they were saying before. People today, Mr. Speaker, really want to know how much money is it going to take to finish St. Jude's? They want to know what are they going to get after we spend this money? And very, very importantly, Mr. Speaker, they want to know how long. You know, they believe that some of the issues that we're bringing up here, all the threats that have been made in the past about inquiries and all kinds of stuff that have unearthed what? And even when we unearth information on people, Mr. Speaker, who cares? It just goes on deaf ears. There's hard evidence, Mr. Speaker, on members in this House in which we've chosen to ignore, but yet we're continuously looking for the next issue that we can distract people's attentions from. But are we really interested, ultimately at the end of the day, in the corruption? So, Mr. Speaker, it's very important, I think, that we start from what we inherited, because that's what I can speak to. What we inherited in 2016. And I think that a lot of information has already been provided, so I'm not going to get into a lot of detail, but it was amazing to me the detail that was not spoken to. So the first inkling of a problem, Mr. Speaker, really is the infamous letter of March 30th, in which the then Permanent Secretary, Ms. Polius, wrote a letter to the then Prime Minister from Vieux-Fort South, in which they alerted the then Prime Minister that there was going to be a delay in the project. A further delay, as the project was supposed to be completed by the summer of 2016. And what they indicated was that the project now, more than likely, hopefully, would come to completion by the end of December of 2016. But also very importantly, Mr. Speaker, that the cost of the project, which had originally been estimated at $60 million, was now estimated to come in at $180 million. That's the first red flag that something was wrong. The next report that we received, Mr. Speaker, is the handover report from Ms. Shanty King. And the report, very interesting report, Mr. Speaker, because the report gives us a very good insight as to why we were where we were. So when the United Workers' Party demitted office in 2011, Mr. Speaker, the hospital, which was a rebuild of the existing surgical hospital with the addition of some rooms, was almost 85% complete. So, and that's 85% complete of what was originally going to be just a rebuild of the surgical lab and the adding of 30 etc. rooms, and exactly what the Prime Minister King said in his presentation. A building that would have allowed the transfer of the persons who were currently operating in the stadium to move into that temporary facility. And it's important because it's in this report. On page 7, it says, Mr. Speaker, of the Shanty King report, as a result of the change in scope and associated costs, it was determined that the approach to the renovation of the existing facility and construction of a new facility at St Jude be revisited. In this regard, a new strategic approach had been approved by the former Prime Minister King in August of 2011. This new approach allowed for the renovated facility to be retained and a smaller specialist hospital to be constructed on the new site as a result. This approach was expected to guarantee the reinstatement of St Jude Hospital completely at its original site with a new improved infrastructure. The preliminary design for the specialist facility was initiated with the commencement of a needs assessment to inform the design of the new facility. This was expected to facilitate a new design brief for the development of the preliminary designs and bid documents for a possible PPP transaction. It is expected that this facility would be a referral hospital to serve St. Lucia and the region. The International Finance Corporation of the World Bank had been formally engaged to advise the government of St. Lucia on the facility of the public-private partnership transaction. The due diligence process was ongoing, after which a formal engagement was expected. And this is currently on hold and being reviewed by the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Finance and Public-Private Sector Committee. It goes on and says, Mr. Speaker, that the Department of Economic Development is the government agency responsible for the planning and implementation of this project. A project management unit was set up in February of 2010. The main responsibilities of the PMU is to facilitate the planning and implementation of the St Jude Hospital Reconstruction project, oversee the implementation of the works and services to be contracted under this project, and prepare progress reports for the Government of St. Lucia on the status of the implementation. The PMU also facilitated resource mobilization where possible. A project steering committee, which we've been in reference to, has been set up to guide and oversee the implementation of the project, and the committee meets monthly where possible and it compromises of the persons that have been mentioned. So, Mr. Speaker, it then goes on to show the donations that were made, the loan funding that we've spoken about, and gives basically a list of all the contracts that were executed. The human resource assessment for St. Jude Hospital. A number of contracts had to be issued over a period of time for varying scope of works. This was a result of inadequate financing to facilitate procurement of a single contract. The contracts were issued based on financial resources approved for the respective financial years. The consultant was advised of the approved budget and the project to completion. All contracts were approved as direct awards by the Honourable Prime Minister King and the Honourable Prime Minister Kenny Anthony, upon the written request and recommendation of the Permanent Secretary, Mr. Isaac Anthony, Dr. Reginald Darius, and Ms. Tracy Polius, based on information provided by the PMU. The scope and the amount of all construction contracts were reviewed and recommended to the PMU by the consultant Halcro Limited based on their reviews and professional recommendations. The initial decision to utilize Cyril Donnelly Construction to commence the construction works was made by the government of St. Lucia on the basis that the company was utilized at the time of the fire prior to the commencement of the project to handle immediate construction needs, especially asbestos removal from the site. Speaker, the report goes on to say that the total project expenditure of $98 million is shown in the following table from the commencement of the project of February 2010 to in the financial year of 2009-2010 to the end of the period of financial year 2016-2017. And it goes on and says, these are the little details that we tend to skip over. It says, please note that all expenditure for the financial years confirmed by the PMU and the Account Department. However, Accounts Department confirmation is pending for the financial year 2016-2017 for the period ending July 31st, 2016. And once we know and we got the further reports, that $98 million, Mr. Speaker, ended up becoming $118 million is what was spent at that point. Mr. Speaker, it says on page 18, a change in policy direction in August of 2011 resulted in a replanning exercise to facilitate permanent reoccupation of the St. Jude Hospital. However, financing was not available to meet the requirements of the new direction. As such, the PMU developed a strategy to disaggregate the outstanding works into smaller components and into thematic areas to qualify for targeted sources of funding, such as water, wastewater components, renewable energy components, medical equipment components. This resulted in the project management unit preparing various proposals for funding. Mexican government, the German government, the World Bank, the United States government, Taiwanese government. So in English, Mr. Speaker, there was not enough money to be able to do the entire project. So what the project was done is the PMU broke the project down into smaller parts and then went out and solicited funding for each of those components separately. So that's why we saw the Mexicans building the morgue and the Germans doing the electrical part of it. So the PMU knew they didn't have enough money, but they felt it was going to be easier to source the funding by breaking the project down into smaller parts. Construction on the site from 2010 to 2014 was directly related to the limited funds available to the government of St. Lucia, the Republic of China, Taiwan, German government, Australian government. With the change in the implementation strategy, there was a greater demand on the government of St. Lucia to mobilize financial resources to facilitate the implementation of works. Very importantly, Mr. Speaker, during the period of 2012 to 2015, the availability of funding dictated the pace of works on the ground. And I quote, despite the request by the project management unit for adequate financial resources to progress work on site, the funds made available were inadequate and work on site was restricted to approved funds for the respective financial years due to budgetary constraints. It goes on. As such, although much work could have progressed in the period 2012 to 2015, the work completed was restricted to the contracts issued based on the available funds. This inadequate financing posed additional issues, especially with a change in the policy direction, which was eventually accepted by the new government in November 2011. The Honorable Kenny Anthony, due to the uncertainty of the funding, it was challenging to progress certain project components on the ground. Mr. Speaker, it goes on to say, as a result of these issues still impacting on the available funds, a decision was taken to break up the project into phases, and it was broken up into 3 phases, Mr. Speaker. The Ministry of Health is part of the steering committee. and has full knowledge of the funding submissions, including the submission for renewable energy solutions for the St Jude Hospital. Although decision was taken to divert the resources to new national hospital, assurances have been given by the Permanent Secretary that the other sources of funding will be mobilized to execute the components of St Jude Hospital. Challenges with the original main contractor. Cyril Donnelly Construction Limited, resulting in ongoing contracts being concluded by December 2013. The major issue with the main contractor was primarily his inability at the time to adequately finance the project works despite being paid the work done. There were no major issues with all of the subcontractors, and associated works produced as expected were hindered by the main contractor, whose major responsibility was that of the civil works components. The St Jude Hospital, to facilitate permanent occupation, prior to this, there was no confirmation that the government of St. Lucia was able to fund the revised policy direction of full reconstruction of the St. Jude Hospital. So in many ways, Mr. Speaker, the PMU was given a basket to hold water. The PMU was not only understaffed, 3 people, but they were underfinanced, and yet, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister and the former government want us to believe that St. Jude was a priority. You know, the thing is that action speaks much louder than words. Not my words. This is the report of Shanta King. This is the report that she faced. And remember, I'm saying to you, this is the report that we were relied upon initially, plus the other information. So, Mr. Speaker, let's continue.
We have teachers in that.
Over the last 2.5 years, there have been a number of requests from St. Jude Hospital being aware of the equipment in storage. Based on the request from St. Jude Hospital, a number of pieces of equipment have been transferred further to approval to the Permanent Secretary and the Deputy Permanent Secretary. PMU files contain relevant approval for transfer documents. This includes medical equipment stored by holder, laundry equipment, printer, and a computer equipment. Mr. Speaker, proposals were received. This is the interesting part, Mr. Speaker. Proposals were received from Accreditation Canada for the commencement and the accreditation process, which was scheduled for January, February of 2017. I want to repeat that again, Mr. Speaker. Proposals were received for Accreditation Canada for the commencement of the accreditation process, which was scheduled for January to February of 2017. Now remember, at the time, this was a government that was saying every 6 months, the Minister of Health was up there saying that the hospital is about to open. Let's not forget that. Hospital is going to open, hospital is going to open, hospital is open, but yet the accreditation process, and I want to make this very clear, Accreditation Canada is a private entity. And what it does, it helps hospitals and health institutions with best practices for operations. It is not an institution that goes in and looks at the physical layout of the buildings to give accreditation to the buildings. And that is why they could not come until it was operational. And that they themselves were also helping the government of St. Lucia, and rightfully so, to identify consultants to help now transfer the staff and the operations from the stadium into the new facility. So, Mr. Speaker, after reading this document and going through it in a lot of detail, and also looking at the supporting documents, and after a couple of field trips to the building site, in which there were claims that the building was 75% ready to be moved in. We were moving in any day. One obviously expected when they went there, because remember, the opposition then was denied the opportunity to go and visit the site. I remember standing up outside the gate as a parliamentarian, being denied being able to come in, with other parliamentarians, being denied the opportunity to come in. And that's despite making several requests to the government that we allowed as the opposition to go on the site to it. And I have to tell you, it was shocking when they went and what they found. So those experiences, Mr. Speaker, and the exit report that was done by Shanta King clearly did not show a very good picture. And certainly things like a master plan, things like planning approval, things for anybody to articulate exactly where this building was going to go and what it was going to look like, it was very difficult to find any of that information. So that's why, Mr. Speaker, it just so happened when I was at a meeting with CDB and I was looking for an engineering firm to review what had happened, and CDB said, but you have the best engineering firm in St. Lucia. I said, who's that? They said, FDL. So what do you mean? They said, FDL is one of the primary engineering firms that CDB uses. And they're world class. And they, in fact, CDB was concerned because they were so dependent on FDL. So we contacted Mr. Fontenart and asked Mr. Fontenart if he would put together a team of people to actually do an assessment report on the facility. He completed the final report in December of 2017, Mr. Speaker, and he completed an interim report, I believe, was in September of 2016. It was a technical audit. $1 million. Right? I would love to know how much you paid the other people for the report. But anyway, that's not an issue. So the consultant ended up putting together quite an extensive team, Mr. Speaker, of people with the requisite expertise in hospital operations, electrical, all of the different technical aspects, staffing, etc., to do a review of the building and the facility. And Mr. Speaker, it was alarming. No member of the consultants team for contract 1 was assigned the key position of senior engineer technician. Instead, the consultant team comprised of a site engineer and a building engineer, none of whom have specific experience in hospital design or construction. Moreover, the assigned site engineer possesses neither the academic qualifications of an engineer nor the requisite construction supervision experience. While he has 5 years of work experience in a limited and analogous to the monitoring activities for construction of one building, a home for elderly, and one road project rather than supervision of construction. No member of the consultant's initial team of key experts from contract number 1 had any specific specialist experience in hospital-related design and construction. Notwithstanding, the consultant identified 4 non-key specialists who would be available to provide advice if deemed necessary, namely 1 hospital MEP, 2 hospital building specialists, and 1 hospital architect. Goes on to say, the billing and the payment records examined to date show no payment request or payment associated with these individuals. It can be deduced from this that their services were not utilized during the project. Mr. Speaker, the list goes on. I refer now specifically to some of the specific findings, Mr. Speaker, because, you know, the former Prime Minister, Kenny Anthony, said a very important thing. Words, 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 nice words. But what I want to get into now is a bit more of the detail. So when we say that the building was inadequate, when we say the building had not reached standards, maybe by getting into some of the detail of what those issues are, that we can have a better understanding. Because, you know, Mr. Speaker, here we are as parliamentarians being asked today through this motion to do what? To make comparisons of reports? That's our role now? Well, that's what you've been asking us to do. So you're asking us to justify why the decisions were made. And if we're going to justify what the decision made, we must understand what the facts were, because the facts matter. The site appears to have been designed with vehicle access being the main mode of transportation, as all public or patient-related buildings are not within easy walking distance of the west or south entrances. So fundamentally that the site is not pedestrian-friendly. As it is unclear, we can only assume that adequate sidewalk access has been proposed. However, a covered bus stop provided suggests that the transportation authorities will be allowed to have the hospital as one of their drop-off and pick-up points along the public bus routes. Though this appears to be thoughtful, the placement of this bus stop could adversely affect the flow of traffic and incur bottlenecks, as there is no lay-by consideration for what is one of the main vehicle access points. The East Wing building. The building is separated into multiple specialized department areas. The main department areas are clinics and wards. They are constructed of concrete masonry units. 8 inches of external walls and internal walls vary between 4 and 6 inches. Additionally, some of the internal partition walls are specified to be drywall. However, it is important to note that the drywall specifications was not stated. Therefore, there is no clear identification that these have any fire ratings. The lack of fire-rated doors and no specification of the drywall clearly shows there is a gap between the fire and safety compartmentalization planning, as well as the building and spatial functional planning. The surgical building is located towards the northern section of the facility, between the west wing and the east wing. The building is separated into 10 main department areas. It is constructed of concrete masonry units, 8 inches for external walls, and internal walls vary between 4 inches and 6 inches. Additionally, some of the internal partition walls are drywall. However, it is important to note that the drywall specifications was not stated. Therefore, there is no clear identification that these have any fire ratings. The lack of fire-rated doors and no specifications for the drywall clearly shows a gap between fire and safety compartmentalization planning and building and spatial functionality planning. Some of the specialized rooms with the diagnostic imaging department should have complete vaulted structure walls, roofs, and floors. However, in many cases, the walls are thicker, but the additional thickness of the floors has not been addressed. This would prove to be a health hazard over time, as the leakage of radiation from this imaging department, especially with the operation theater spaces above. The conclusion of just the buildings. Though history, research, and documentation, we've come to understand that the built environment has a long and profound effect on health and well-being, with the intended effect of any healthcare facility be that of a positive one. The primary mission of the healthcare is to do no harm, and this can be seen not only apply in the eternal application of healthcare, but the provisions of such which are nature of their design can affect the ability of the care to be administered. The review of the site planning and audit of each building structure on the site revealed inefficiencies, exclusions, code violations, and design contradictions that could very well lead to this renovated facility falling victim to the devastation by fire and rendered it unusable initially, as well as other ill-intended consequences. The issues highlighted are significant in nature. However, great value in present works completed to date, since the project is, and that's the part, you know, we've read it over and over, but again, we're always very selective of what we want to read. So here's what his conclusion is. The issues highlighted are significant in nature. However, great value is present in the works completed to date, since the project is salvageable and could be converted into a facility that can properly serve the needs of St. Lucia. The St Jude Hospital is designated as a district hospital with one of its primary roles to ensure effective acute and referral services to the south of the island. The visual component of the design does little for the potential that the history and nostalgia of the site dictates. More could be done to uplift the image and swell the hearts of all those who have contributed to the facility held in such high esteem by the people of St. Lucia. So again, when we say, if we're going to listen to the engineer on one aspect that it can be salvageable, let us start understanding the level of deficiencies and inadequacies that the same engineering team have identified. And why is this important? Why am I taking my time to read many of these different issues? And I can go on. The installed generator is undersized. Plumbing. There are general and non-specific specifications pertinent to plumbing on the project. Plumbing work is detailed in Annex F. Much of the specification is redundant, dealing with repeatedly with external drainage. With regard to the internal plumbing of specific plumbing systems, the internal plumbing, there's little or no specification on the sanitary drainage and vent system, water heating system, portable water storage and pipe system, fire service systems, hydrants, dry rises, hot and cold water plumbing, gas piping for kitchen, floor drains, metering for the hot and cold water, and requirements for the access panels. In the handover status report,
Member for Castries Central, what is...
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order, I do know, Mr. Speaker, in the debate that reference can be made to a report and excerpts can be quoted. But we are here taking reading classes, Mr. Speaker, which is not the objective of this exercise. The member is free to refer to any report. That I accede to. But to sit here and to listen to pages and pages of a report that has been in existence from 2016 is not what this debate is all about, Mr. Speaker. So whilst reference can be made, I have had enough of that reading from the report, Mr. Speaker.
And I'm called the autocrat. It's amazing. The handover status report activity status section 6 indicates in item 14 that the design activities for plumbing are complete. However, a review indicates that no design work is available for the LPG installation at item 42. Design information of solar panels is complete, but there is no verifiable drawings or specifications for the major solar panel installation and is linked to the building. The most common defect observed were cracks in the concrete and masonry components of the building. They're related primarily to poor construction and can be easily repaired. The cracks appear superficial and non-structural in nature, except for those recorded in the dialysis building. Now, we keep making reference, Mr. Speaker, to two buildings that were demolished. The fact is that both of those buildings were structurally undermined. You know what's amazing is in one of the buildings, Mr. Speaker, they were in such a haste to build it, they built it over a tree trunk. And they left the tree trunk alive. So the tree trunk was actually still growing underneath the foundation and was causing all of the cracks. And one of the buildings that was deficient, in which it did not put any proper draining under the building, Mr. Speaker, was a dialysis building. And what it was doing was allowing seepage of water and other exterior elements to enter into an area which is supposed to be controlled environment. Mr. Speaker. So the fact is, Mr. Speaker, that it is okay to continue to say that buildings were broken down, but without explaining and understanding why they were broken down. And the question becomes, why were they built there in the first place, Mr. Speaker? Due to limitations and inconsistencies in the existing data, the structural capacity checks were limited to the roof structure. Rafter size to span plywood sheeting thickness to the span ratios were evaluated using the design provisions of AWC, National Design Standard for Wood Construction. The analysis revealed that some structures listed below contain non-compliant rafters, and these were retrofitted as prescribed by the authoritative codes. Mr. Speaker, the origin and cause of the ponding observed in the dialysis building requires further investigation to mitigate the following: seepage into the foundation, induced differential settlement, and secondary defects in the building structure. All timber members that show evidence of fungal growth are to be replaced. Roof connections of all the buildings are to be checked to confirm the tightness and the full compliance with detail requirements, improving fixed rafters and the ring beam. So, Mr. Speaker, it's important to understand that while the building could be salvaged, the end of the day, it comes to what was the cost going to be. So, Mr. Speaker, the intention was that going by what the architects and the engineers had designed for the completion of the building, Mr. Speaker, that the estimated cost to complete from $118 million would be another $82 million, Mr. Speaker. Now, what's interesting, Mr. Speaker, is that we heard the same members of this House, when they were in opposition, that said, go and put some Clorox, some paint, $5 million, $10 million, and you can move into the building in a couple of months. Well, Mr. Speaker, they have answered their own question. We've been now 18 months. And what has this government delivered on St. Jude, Mr. Speaker? All they have delivered, Mr. Speaker, is a report that when you break it down is 25 pages and lacks any level of detail. None. Okay, Mr. Speaker? None. No detail. In fact, what it says is that it's going to take another 3 years before we can move into St. Jude's, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I've highlighted the deficiency problems. And the problem was, and that's when we met with the technical team, in terms of their assessment of the $82 million to complete the building. And we said, Mr. Speaker, okay, can we re-engineer the building to downsize the aspiration of the building so that we can move the facility from the George Odlum Stadium into this new facility? That cost was still $80 million. And what they said, Mr. Speaker, which after now I've read some of this detail, hopefully we have an appreciation, honestly, with what the problem is. And that's the problem, is when you try to fix up old buildings. When you try to cure some of the problems and the deficiencies that were identified in the report, it may actually end up costing you more money. And Mr. Speaker, I am confident that that's right. Because, you know, this cabinet received this report on October 21st. So almost 14 months has gone by, Mr. Speaker. 14 months. You've had this report, and you've done nothing with it. In fact, Mr. Speaker, there's one aspect in the report. It says that one of the recommendations it makes, Mr. Speaker, the recommendation it makes is that it should go and clad an area off and clean it. And it said what they should do is to give it multiple contracts to help out some of the people. But what did this government do? They went back to their old ways. One contract, direct award, to who? To who? Who got the contract? And we don't even know, is it $10 million that they got to clean the building? So you're telling me that when you were in opposition, you said all you needed was some Clorox and some paint, and it would cost you $10 million to go in, but you've spent $10 million on just trying to desanitize the building. You've done nothing. Do not try to defend that. You have achieved nothing. 18 months has gone by. You want to continue to convince people you're putting people first, but the member from Viewport North got it right. All of this is a facade to defend the victory, to try to convince people that you are great, that you are right. And guess what? You don't even have the magnitude, the standard to stand up and accept responsibility for your role in St. Jude's. And more importantly, that role now is growing every single day, and every day that passes by that we don't open St. Jude's. But even more shameful, Mr. Speaker, is that this report doesn't even give you a way forward. So, Mr. Speaker, let's go to the pertinent thing in this report. So the first thing, Mr. Speaker, that's farcical. The first thing that's farcical, Mr. Speaker, is by Cabinet Conclusion number 6 of 2021, dated August, page 6. Cabinet approved the appointment of a committee to review the options and for the completion of the Commission of St. Jude's, and to advise Cabinet on the feasibility and requirements for immediate move and transfer of operations from George Odlum to the old building. Some people call it a chicken coop. I don't know. I'll keep referring to it as the old building. The fact is that, Mr. Speaker, right? Mr. Speaker, so here it is that we're coming to the House with a motion to ask Parliament to advise Cabinet on a decision they've already made. And then I had to listen to the member from Grosley, Mr. Speaker, who said, no, we're an open government. We like to come and consult and get ideas from people. Mr. Speaker, of the 17 members in this House, 13 of them are in Cabinet. So what, you're coming to the House for the 4 people who are not in Cabinet? 4? That is what we're here for, Mr. Speaker? That's the motion? That Parliament is going to advise Cabinet? You mean to tell me that Cabinet is so lost, they don't know what to do, that they have to come to Parliament? And Mr. Speaker, I know of what I remember and I know of Parliament. Parliament does 2 things. We pass legislation and approve money bills. Where does it say that Parliament is to advise Cabinet? I mean, amazing. And the fact is that who are they fooling? You're going to come to the House and go through a debate and say, oh, Parliament approved this? 15 of the people in this House belong to the opposition, Mr. Speaker. What is the rationale of coming to this House to ask us to debate this? If you want to go and inform the people, go and inform the people. You have NIS, you have everybody else. Go and do it. If you're so proud and you're so committed of what you all have been able to do, go and show the people what you've done. Tell people when you're ready to move into St. Jude's. So, Mr. Speaker.
That's why you lost the election, you don't understand.
So, Mr. Speaker, the mathematics. Page 20, 8.12. The review committee has deduced from the project manager's handover report and the consultant status report that the overall expenditure on Phase 1 at August 2016 was the amount of $98 million. Although we now know that that amount is $118 million, could express in a pro rata basis of approximately 60% for construction works and 40% for furniture. Can you imagine, Mr. Speaker, that they really honestly have written in this report that people are so naive, people are so ignorant, that you would think on a $100 million construction project, that $40 million was used for furniture? Really? And yet in their own report, they show that that's not true? They show that the civil works was almost $90 million by itself? So, Mr. Speaker, if you in fact take the $118 million and divide it by the 150,000 square feet that they're talking about, instead of being $358, Mr. Speaker, it's $540 per square foot. And then when you take the building, the Phase 2 building, Mr. Speaker, and you divide it by the total expenditure of $118 million, and even if you want to take it and add the extra $50 million, Mr. Speaker, the cost comes to the same $540 per square foot, Mr. Speaker. Yet the member from Castries Southeast is coming up with $3,000 and then telling us, oh, because he's estimated how much he thinks it's going to cost to finish the hospital. I don't trust his numbers. What relevance is his numbers? This is the same gentleman, Mr. Speaker, that in a previous report oversaw the construction of a bathroom for $150,000. Member from Denry would remember that.
Yes, that's like the 10.
Okay? All right. But here's the most important thing, Mr. Speaker. Here's the most important thing, Mr. Speaker. Page 28. On 10.3, page 28. You don't even have the document. Mr. Speaker, this is the part that really brings everything home to roost. The state of completion of the works associated with Phase 1, which the review committee had observed at the time of the site visit on the 21st of September, suggests that many of the buildings and functional spaces are more than 75% complete, and that only 2 areas which are still require major works in order to attain practical completion include the surgical and wing and the west wing. 2 very important parts. But what's interesting for me, Mr. Speaker, this same report says that the church is 75% complete. Really? All the church has is some walls. Maybe when they went there, they were confused because they saw a roof on top of it, but that roof is because they were using the church premise as a storage area, and they'd put a temporary roof on. Maybe that had them confused, Mr. Speaker. But here's important, regardless of the approach adopted, because that's where we are today, Mr. Speaker. Where these assumptions are is exactly where the starting point is. I trust that you all will carry the forensic audits. The Price Waterhouse was hired. You can please continue with them, and you can get them to expand it to this new wing that we put in. But at the end of the day, what people are more concerned about is what these assumptions are and what implications that these assumptions have on our ability to open up St. Jude's. These ones. First one, the government of St. Lucia shall be privy to and can terminate or vary all current ongoing contracts. In English, what does that mean? That they have Price, they have a Fresh Start there, and they have OECC there. The assumption is that the government can terminate those contracts. B, all construction documentation, including project drawings, are readily available to review for the reference by others. So it means that they must have all of the relevant documents all available before they can start anything. Phase 1 can attain full approval from the Development Control Authority. Wow, that's a big one. And that is something that has been debated, and you'll find out for yourselves. Can Phase 1 get DCA approval as a hospital? That's a very important question to ask. The transfer of the entire operations of the St. Jude Hospital at the stadium can commence within 18 months. Finance for undertaking and completing all outstanding building works is available. So we saw in the Shanta King report that when you go and you start construction and you've not been able to secure all of your financing in advance, that it's going to be problematic. So this report again rightfully says, assumption that whatever you're going to do, once you've decided that you're going to have the money to complete it. Installation of internal building services including power, lighting, air conditioning, CCTV surveillance, fire signage are approximately 50% completed. And Mr. Speaker, that building has been dormant for almost 10 years. And even before it was dormant, the technical audit had identified that there were many flaws, some of them which I read. So the reality is it really 50% completed? Because do we have to go back and redo a lot of that work that was already done? That's an important question to answer, important question to ask, and an important question to be able to answer. Because if you don't know the answer to that question, then it means that the cost and the time to move into the building is going to be greater. Internal partitions within the key buildings are lightweight and freestanding.
Member for Mico South, you have 10 minutes left.
There are many walls that the material that was used and what it is consists of has not been determined. And a full audit has to be made of that before you can make the decision as to whether you're going to proceed. All outstanding doors and windows for the project are deemed to be materials on site. You mean to tell me in 18 months since this report, 14 months since this report, that hasn't been confirmed? All outstanding floor, wall, and ceiling finishes are deemed to be materials on site. That has not been confirmed. All outstanding iron, mercury, and lock sets are deemed to be materials on site. That has not been determined as yet. All outstanding sanitary fixtures for the entire facility are deemed to be materials on site. That has not been confirmed. Power supply and distribution lines have been installed, tested, and commissioned. That has not been done as yet. External plumbing and draining services, including water lines, hydrants, sewage systems, have all been installed, tested, and commissioned. That's not taken place yet. Given that the review exercise was conducted towards the end of 2021, tropical Atlantic hurricane season, give me a break, it is conceivable that no reconstruction works is likely to commence before the end of 2021. So imagine, this report contemplated that on January of 2022, work would have commenced, and that by December of 2023, we should have actually been moved in. Their own report on page 31. So the reality is, Mr. Speaker, until all of the assumptions that have been laid out, that have been answered properly and costed, you cannot even begin the process of contemplating moving in, which is going to take you 18 months from that period. So I'm going to say, Mr. Speaker, I'm concerned. I think all solutions should be concerned that this is a government that in 18 months has done nothing, and now are going to take another 3 years to move into this project. And that's assuming, Mr. Speaker, that they can accomplish all those assumptions. So, Mr. Speaker, there were some critical things that were brought up in the question period that I felt that I really had to be able to answer. And I think that when we looked at where we were, Shanta King's report, FDL report, and the many questions, which those assumptions were the same things that we were asking ourselves, Mr. Speaker. The question became, was it faster and cheaper to continue to do phase one, or was it better to build phase two? Phase two was better. And why? Because we felt that when you looked at phase one and the deficiencies it has as a hospital, those deficiencies do not exist if you think of it as a university. So imagine it as a medical university. That's why when Ross was leaving Dominica, we were able to bring Lisa Warnell over to St. Lucia, to look at St. Lucia and to look at Vieux Fort in particular. Sadly for us, lucky for Barbados, that when she went to Barbados, the Barbadian government offered them a fixed building, which was the old the conference facility they had. And the same Mark Maloney had a housing project of which they had a bunch of houses there, and they were able to move all the persons in there. So there was a more immediate ability. But the reality is both Lisa and many other people have said, if in fact you do have an operating hospital, and by chance, if that operating hospital starts offering services that are currently not available in St. Lucia, the attractiveness of having a university in proximity of a working hospital is huge. In fact, in Grenada, and let's remember that, in Grenada, the university there, Mr. Speaker, St. George's, was sold for $3 billion. This is big business. They have over 3,500 students there. And the university has been begging to be able to be facilitated and to coordinate with an operational hospital. So, Mr. Speaker, even when you talk about in the motion where it asks where are we going to go, this government has not even thought about that. They're still thinking that the big goal here is to move into St. Jude. Well, wake up. It's not. The idea is to actually have a plan for Vieux Fort. The idea is actually to have a plan for St. Lucia. And when I see now that we're going to move the Oasis-class ships into Castries and abandon the idea of putting a cruise ship port in Vieux Fort, I can't believe it.
Member from Mikusol,
Really?
you have 5 minutes left.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, yes. You know why? Because there was a vision and there was an ambition. I can't believe that there's still members on the opposite side that so much hate growth and development. And yet they believe that they're in the best interest of the people of St. Lucia. Vieux Fort and St. Lucia are falling behind the times. You know, Mr. Speaker, the member from Castries North indicated that he doesn't remember seeing the report. We said it many times in Cabinet. The report was always available to anybody. But you see, it's a memory of convenience. But I'm going to say to the member from Castries North, he needs to open his eyes. Because if he thinks that Lindquist was only investigating Guy Joseph, he needs to think twice. And I'm hoping that the Prime Minister will be honest with you and let you know about the investigations that were being done. Okay, Mr. Speaker? So, Mr. Speaker, it's not me. I don't know what's wrong with you. Oh, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to be intrigued to see when the member sees the documentation of making him a person of interest. It's going to be intriguing to see what he has to say, and it's going to be intriguing to see how the Prime Minister handles that. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to reiterate the question. If we know that Phase 1 cost $118 million, and preliminary estimates, Mr. Speaker, are that it's going to cost $90 million. But it can cost more if, in fact, some of the assumptions prove to be correct and that there are major deficiencies that have to be done. That $100 million could be substantially more. We do know that $118 million has been spent so far. And we do know that it's going to take another $46 million to be able to operationalize downstairs. When the Prime Minister says that there was a bill for $16 million to fix up the roof, part of that $16 million was already included the $46 million. The amount of double counting that I hear him being able to say that. Oh, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Go and check. Go and check, Mr.
Mr. Prime Minister,
Mr. Speaker,
what is the point of order?
What's the point of order, Mr. Speaker?
Member for Miku South, he has risen on a point of order. May I hear him?
Please.
Mr. Speaker, I allowed the member from Microsoft to go on a frolic of his own. But when he sits and he deliberately misleads the House, Mr. Speaker, I must stop him. Mr. Speaker, the $16 million for, and I didn't want to go there, but you see, he pushes me to go there. The $16 million, Mr. Speaker, for the roof is a quotation that came from a company on separate and apart, and I'll give it a date, Mr. Speaker, from the 46 million. Is 60. And if you want me to Speaker, I don't want to do that. But he's pushing me these kind of things. Cost estimates for revised enclosure works, inclusive of insulation and waterproofing of roofs, new wing facilities, St Jude Hospital Reconstruction. And it goes. The total estimated cost of inclusive of VAT is $16,326,624.05 Eastern Caribbean dollars. That was dated on the 19th of December 2022.
Member for Miku South, you have heard an explanation. Would you like to respond to that?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. The fact is what I said that stands. I said part of the $16 million had already been included in the $46 million. I didn't say the entire amount. I said part of the amount was included. That's exactly what I said. So what's the issue? Okay?
Member for Miku South, you have 56 seconds left.
After you took all my time, Mr. Speaker? Wow. So, Mr. Speaker, so here we were confronted with a situation where we had one billing for $118 million with approximately $90 or more million to spend, $118 million and $46 more million to spend to get a 90-room facility. And this idea, Mr. Speaker, that you cannot move in downstairs without upstairs operational. Sure.
Mr. Speaker, the section 32, give the honorable member from Miku South another 10 minutes.
Honorable members, the question is, it's Standing Order 32-8 be suspended to allow the member of Miku South an additional 10 minutes in which to complete his presentation. I now put the question, as many as of that opinion say aye, as many as of a contrary opinion say no. Madam Clerk, please take a call. Member of Miku South, please hold on. But the clerk is taking a call.
Honorable Virginia Albert Poyet, how do you vote? What's that? Are you honorable?
Members, there's a division. You either vote yea, nay, or abstain.
How do you vote? Huh? To allow the honorable leader. Yes? Okay. Honorable is not there. Honorable Kenson Casimir. Honorable Sean Edwell. How do you vote? Honorable Bradley Phillips. How do you? Honorable Richard Frederick. How do you vote? It's not there. Honorable Dr. Hila. Honorable Emma Hippolyte. Honorable Moses Shabati. Honorable Stevenson abstain. Honorable Philip J. Pierre. Honorable Alfred Prosper. Honorable Wayne Girard.
Members, the ayes are 11. If one abstention, an extension of 10 minutes is granted. Please proceed, member from Miku South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much to my colleagues in Parliament. Mr. Speaker, it's important that we can take some level of objectivity in what we're trying to achieve. And that is the issue that's confronting us. If you have phase one of a building that is 28 different buildings, in fact, when you look at it, you cannot think of it, Mr. Speaker, as being a world-class hospital. And you recognize some of the very clear deficiencies it has, and some of the deficiencies are hidden. We don't know the extent of those deficiencies. And when we say the box, Mr. Speaker, the fact is, when you go to any modern hospital today, that's what it is. And it's a box for a reason. In that all the services can be contained in one area. When we talk about the cladding that's being used, Mr. Speaker, the cladding is being used is in order to make it a smart building. A smart building, Mr. Speaker, in the sense that mold is continuing to be a problem plaguing the buildings of St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker. Why? We have global warming. So between the global warming hotter on the outside and now air conditioning on the inside, it's creating that differential in temperature, which is what's creating the humidity and the moisture. And that's why there is 1.5 feet space between the panels, Mr. Speaker, insulated in order to reduce the heat from the outside, reduce the cold from the inside, so when they meet in the middle, it's a much more compatible temperature. And then there's a pan at the bottom so that if there is any moisture, it is taken outside of the building. So what does it do, Mr. Speaker? It reduces and eliminates mold. It improves the efficiency of the air conditioning on the inside. The other model that was used, Mr. Speaker, when you go into the building, the ceilings are this height for a reason. Because instead of putting all of the electrical and the plumbing in the walls, in the concrete walls, they're put in trays in the roof and they're then conducted down into the drywalls. So anytime that you want to move the drywall, it's a very simple move, Mr. Speaker. These are the great efficiencies that have been created in this building. And if in fact, and I want to say that what the member from Vieux-Fort South said, and I want to echo his sentiments. We need to wake up in this country, Mr. Speaker, that we are in this fight by ourselves. This brotherhood that we talk about in the Caribbean of people caring for us, they don't. Anytime anybody can eat your lunch, they will. And we're falling behind, Mr. Speaker. And it's no point in me or anybody else gloating about us falling backwards, because it affects all of us. All of us in the same way. And until we can get over that same attitude, Mr. Speaker, of wanting to blame everybody for, you are in charge. This idea that somehow I resent, I don't. I agree in the democratic process. I'm happy to sit over here. That's what the people wanted. I'm happy to do it. And I am going to participate actively as the role of the leader of the opposition. But at the same time, we expect you to participate as the government and take the lead and get things done. Yes, there are challenging times in our country, Mr. Speaker. Some of them that the Prime Minister doesn't want to speak of. We have a major recession looming. Nobody knows how deep the recession is going to be. Nobody knows how long the recession is going to be. We have major difficulties in our own economy. The Minister of Tourism may believe that he has all the answers, but sadly, we're in trouble. We're in serious trouble. The second American Airlines flight has been cut. The flight to Chicago has been cut. The flight to Dallas has been cut. The flights to Newark have been cut. The British Airways flights are now all being shared. And we're so desperate that I waited for the member from Castries South, who is the Minister of CIP. I was hoping today that he would have given us some report, Mr. Speaker, that they've lowered the prices of CIP. Best kept secret in St. Lucia. We're now selling passports in Iran. We're the leader in the Caribbean. Where's the information? You keep coming here and you're saying that you want to be transparent, but it's only transparent on things that you think they're going to make you look good. But you need to be transparent about some of the things that are not so easy and some of the difficult decisions. But Mr. Speaker, this St. Jude's Hospital, do not let it suffer from a lack of ambition. It's not about just building a hospital. And I listened to the member from Castries North. There's some efficiencies that we were already working on. The Millennium Heights board, in our opinion when we were in government, needed to be the singular board. And the St. Jude report needed to report to it. Why? Let's make sure that there's synergies. We're talking about having to build a laundry room, and maybe we shouldn't build it because we have a large laundry room that's underutilized at the Millennium Heights. In the training of the technical staffs, I applaud you, sir, in the new department you've created. But we need to now create synergies for both hospitals. That we have accounting, we have IT, we have many of our technical staff that can be shared. And the reality is that when we're talking about universal health care, I still don't know what you're saying. Is universal health care universal insurance? Or is universal health care that the government is going to fund it? Because if it's going to fund it, where is the money going to come from? You know, Mr. Speaker, they have some people you just have to choose just to, you know, they don't know, to forgive them for they do not know better, Lord. That's all I can say. So, Mr. Speaker, the member, my colleague, had made reference to a particular engineer. And I want to repeat what that engineer said. His name is John Peters. I have no query in saying it. And John Peters said, when he read the FDL report, he said, what has happened in St. Jude is a disgrace. It's the worst I've ever seen in my 34 years of engineering. In terms of contract administration, it is a mess of Herculean, as it says, proportions. It is sad, as a professional engineer, reading such a document and to see how state funds have been so wasted. It was really difficult to read the document and to see the level of maladministration. You know, we use that word maladministration. The first time maladministration was used was not in social media. It was not a press review. The word maladministration was used in an inquiry, the Rumshehoyd report. A third party that spoke about maladministration, that has now become a household name in this country, as it were, in terms of how you should run a project and run a contract. So that was a bit sad, one must say, and it really goes to the issue of accountability. I would want to say, too, that we have to hold public servants, exactly what the member from Castries from Beaufort South said, accountable. We have to hold ministers of government responsible. The Constitution is clear in terms of...
you have 2 minutes left.
Thank you. Responsibility of a minister of directing and controlling his ministry or her ministry. The role of a permanent secretary in terms of her responsibility, or his or her responsibility to supervise. Their consultancy says that they were supposed to ensure that the designs were compliant with Accreditation Canada. It's an international body based in Canada. However, what the audit did was that the audit has not mentioned any issues relating to Accreditation Canada, because Accreditation Canada never made it in. We've not opened the hospital. Accreditation Canada is only going to come to view the operations, not the design of the building, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, if my 2 cents is worth anything, and in fact, if in fact this government has any ambitions for the South, that they would abandon the idea of moving into phase 1 and continue moving into phase 2. And that the government ought to start looking at using phase 1 building as a university or some kind of training institution. Nursing. The more nurses we can train in this country, Mr. Speaker, the more that we can export and use for our own services. It's the hottest attempt. Many. Okay, Mr. Speaker? So the idea, Mr. Speaker, is that even if my government didn't do something, doesn't make it wrong. The reality is what we should be doing things is to progress this country, to move this country forward, and to answer the needs of people who don't have time, Mr. Speaker, to go through these things in detail. So, Mr. Speaker, for my 2 cents, 1, we move into phase 2. We look at using phase 1 as a university area, and I'm certainly going to try to encourage this government to reignite what we were doing in the South. Reconsider. Don't build Oasis-class ships in Castries. Do not overload Castries, Mr. Speaker. Use the Oasis classes to move into...
Member, your time is up. Please wrap up. Member, please wrap up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.